In the final analysis, though, we're Americans first. And we have to always ask the question, what business is it of ours what people in other countries do, regardless of where they live? So they very definitely want to see Iran destroyed. But Iran's turning out to be a much tougher nut to crack.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor was on Natalie Brunell's podcast talking about the truth regarding the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, its history, whether the recent bomb strike on Iran and the U.S. participation in Israel's war against Iran was beneficial in any way, and what are the ramifications for the Middle East going forward. So let's watch and let's react. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel.
Lately on social media, I see people sharing video clips and photographs of Iran, like in the 1970s, where women are in regular clothes, sometimes in bikinis. I mean, life looks actually very progressive and modern. And then there was this massive change that happened. And I also do want to actually make a separation here between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, the Israeli government, the Israeli people, because just like here, I mean, our views as Americans don't always reflect our leaders, right? And the choices that they make. And I think everyone's conflating a lot of this together. But can you back up and talk a little bit about how we got to this level of conflict with Iran and people, I mean, even in the leadership positions like Ted Cruz, when he went on Tucker Carlson's show, kind of hinting that they should have a regime change. President Trump was tweeting about how they should make Iran great again, but that's up to the people. I mean, I'm just a little bit confused, I guess, about the dynamics between the government and the people of each of these countries.
He makes a good point just right off the bat that the people of a country are not the same as the rulers of the country. And if I'm a dissident in America, how could I believe that there wouldn't be dissidents in other countries that detest their own government? That's a point that's rarely made. A lot of people just conflate what their government is with all the people there. So let's see how Macgregor answers it.
Well, I think you have to distinguish the Iran from 1979 and the Iran today, 46 years later. It's actually very, very different. Some colleagues from Egypt flew to Iran during Ramadan. They actually went to the city of Qom, Qom, which is the theological center of Shia Islam in Iran and in the world, frankly. And they were shocked at what they saw. The restaurants were full. It was all during Ramadan, when normally everybody fasts. If you go to any of the Arab countries, the restaurants were shut down. No one ate until after sundown. Not in Qom and not in Iran. In other words, it looked like most European cities. And contrary to their expectations, most women were not walking around in bags. In fact, anything could be further from the truth. I think Iran has changed a great deal. The mosques, it used to be packed, and the police, it used to herd people into the mosques, literally at gunpoint. You know, you got into trouble if you didn't go to the mosque on Friday or for Friday prayers. That's over. If anything, they have trouble mobilizing people to go to the mosques. I think Iran has changed dramatically. Second thing.
Yeah, it does seem like that many of the countries within the Middle East have secularized to some extent, maybe not to the same extent as the United States has secularized, certainly so. But in some of these countries, that is the case. And I don't know that much about Iran's, propensity to do that, their trajectory to do that. But we have seen evidence of that. And there are, believe it or not, about, 15 to 20,000 Jews that live in Iran, I believe. And that country is a very large country, and that seems like a very small number. But just that shows you that, there are differences that these countries embrace over time that make them different from people's perceptions in America. Now, she's right. During a lot of that time frame leading up to 1979, there were more pro-Western attitudes, openly expressed in Iran. The Shah ruled Iran, but at the same time, he enacted a censorship regime and a secret police punishing and executing dissidents, and it really made the hardliners upset. And that's the reason for the revolution. Essentially, the U.S. laid the seeds for the revolution to transpire. I'm not saying life wasn't better in many ways. It certainly seems to have been. But it is because of U.S. intervention that revolution transpired and culminated in 79 to begin with.
And I'm glad you mentioned this. There are some other similarities between what we started to do in Ukraine and failed to do and what we seem to be interested in doing in Iran. Our objective was not simply to build up Ukraine and turn it into a battering ram that could destroy Russia. We had people in the city of London, banks, in New York City, and elsewhere that were salivating at the prospect of bringing down Putin, destroying the regime, ultimately fragmenting Russia, and then stripping Russia of its numerous resources. In other
What a fool's errand that idea ever was.
words, make Russia back into a third world vassal state that could be exploited, which is effectively what happened in the 1990s. Well, that's failed. Putin isn't going anywhere. There will be no revolution in Russia, and Putin is strongly supported. So now let's fast forward to Iran. If you look at Iran, Iran has a number of minorities inside of it. I know Ted Cruz is unfamiliar with this sort of thing,
Yeah.
but you have Azeri Turks in the north, millions. You have Arabs. You have Balukis. I mean, we could go down the list. More than 50% of the country consists of a so-called Persian population, original. But the truth is, Persian culture, Persian identity have been extended across the country. The country is actually far more cohesive than everybody thinks. Just as people discovered that Russia was far more cohesive than everybody thought.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of it is the result of this strike too, because it was Israel that struck first. They had a literal unprovoked attack against Iran. They claimed otherwise. They claimed, that, attacks from 2004 from Iran to Israel, they were responding to that in their war propaganda, but that wasn't the case because Israel struck Iran first last year as well when they bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus last year and killed a bunch of members of the government there. So, but that is what the result is naturally for most powers that do get attacked by foreign governments. We saw this in Pearl Harbor. The United States, solidified behind the movement of joining World War II finally, right? Even after Lend-Lease. And Lend-Lease was, essentially the United States' first foray into the war, but not directly. But Pearl Harbor made that happen. So did 9/11. When the U.S. got attacked in 9/11, the populace generally rallied behind Bush and said, hey, we need to smack these terrorists back. And because of that, we got 20-year occupations in two countries. We got the DHS, we got the Patriot Act, we got the TSA, we got the beginnings of the PRISM program and the expansive surveillance state. And we're not seeing anything different in Iran now. I do think that the population is less likely to rise up and overthrow the Ayatollah now based on what's happened, and they stood up to the big bullies on the block, the United States and Israel, and not much has changed. Trump says mission accomplished when it comes to their nuclear enrichment program, but it sure seems like they got a lot of that uranium out, especially at Fordo. So I think Macgregor's right here, both in regard to Putin and Iran, and the strike against Iran was counterintuitive. It killed a bunch of people only to put fate into Iran's hands and the hopes that they wouldn't act as if the way that the neocons claimed, that they'd act to try to wipe Israel off the map or kill as many U.S. soldiers as possible. They didn't do that, and it's because of Iranian restraint that we aren't in a regime change war, thankfully. The worst scenario didn't unfold.
We've been trying to start Muslim insurrections against the Russian state for years. And look at the performance of the Chechens and the Muslim troops that served with the Soviet armed forces. Brilliant. Being there among the best troops on the ground fighting in eastern Ukraine. So that's failed. This is the next opportunity by the same group of people to do to Iran what they failed to do to Russia. And no one should have any doubt in their minds about the desire to capture those oil and gas fields in Iran and control it. That's what they want to do. But Iran has turned out to be far more resilient, far more robust than thought.
That's true, and it looks like, Israel made a perilous decision in deciding to attack. They were running out of missiles. You can't enact a regime change as Netanyahu wanted, just with airstrikes or with sea strikes. That literally never happens. It takes boots on the ground or internal proxy coups to overthrow a government, neither of which happened. So we're in the same position, and if anything, they get a propaganda victory out of this that's arguably stronger, actually probably inarguably more stronger than the Israeli and U.S. propaganda victory that, oh, mission accomplished. Well, if you believe in mission accomplished, Trump and Hegseth, I'm sure hoping the U.S. doesn't get bogged down in these stupid military operations in Iran again. Because I don't know. I don't know if I can bank on that. Netanyahu's been saying they're weeks away from a nuke for 35 years. He's wanted a regime change for 35 years. The neocons have wanted a regime change there for that long, too. And clean break proves that the U.S. had planned it at one point. So, yeah, I don't think this is over yet. And the Iranians get a bigger propaganda victory than the U.S. in all this.
Than originally thought. And on top of that, of course, you have Russia and China, who are both standing with Iran. The defense minister of Russia, when the president of Iran was visiting yesterday, or just before he left, I guess yesterday, said there is no doubt that Russia will stand by Iran. We support them. We will stand by them. The Chinese have said much the same thing. And remember, Pakistan is effectively the face of Chinese power and influence when it comes to support for Iran. So I think everything that was assumed has failed. And the notion that now everything is fine because there will never be a nuclear weapon is absolutely laughable. Because in Iran and across the region, in fact, probably around the world, everyone has concluded if you want to survive in a world where the Americans and their Israeli proxies are ready to attack and destroy you, well, you better get a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that's the biggest lesson I think learned from this whole stupid foray into militarism in Iran is that if you're Iran, a power that's watching what's unfolding, and that's Israel and the United States putting regime change on the table, threatening you, bombing you in a preemptive strike, and, taking out all these facilities, including residential facilities, that was the first target of the Israelis, remember, is that why wouldn't you fast track a nuke? Now, I know there was a fatwa issued by the Ayatollah, many years ago saying that Iran won't have nuclear weapons, a fatwa, kind of a religious edict. But if I'm an Iranian nationalist that wants this regime to survive, that believes in sovereignty and, self-preservation, I would want to fast track a nuke as soon as possible. And it's not just this recent attack that would prove that, although that's probably the last nail in the coffin. But just look at how the U.S. treats North Korea, where we don't put regime change operations on the table. We don't flirt with it. We don't pretend that's going to happen. We don't start up war propaganda to overthrow the Kim dynasty there. That'd be foolhardy and insane. But what did we do to Gaddafi? He gave up his nuclear program, his weapons programs, his chemical weapons programs, and his nuclear weapons program, which was in kind of the very initial stages in the mid-2000s. Well, George W. Bush got out there, did a grand speech about how great it is that Gaddafi is joining the panoply of modern nations and making such a great decision. Well, guess what? The U.S. funded rebels that overthrew him and led a U.S.-backed NATO coalition to do that. And guess what? This proves also that NATO's not exactly a defensive alliance in every case. Just ask Gaddafi, ask the Afghanis, ask the Balkan wars that suffered under NATO defensive alliance, and ask Putin expanding NATO and putting NATO weaponry basically along Russia's border. The U.S. wouldn't take that in Mexico, that's for sure. And by the way, flirting to put Ukraine in your military alliance, well, what if Russia did that to Mexico or Canada? I think we know what would happen.
That's the lesson. So now we will see nuclear weapons proliferate.
Well, so was Iran getting close to a nuclear weapon? Because that's something that we've heard from Netanyahu during countless interviews and testimonies before our political leaders in Washington, D.C. I mean, he's been saying this for a long, long time. And then I believe Tulsi Gabbard testified saying, no, they don't. But then President Trump was on the plane and said he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard says. And they were very, very close to it. And that's what this was all about. I mean, forgive me for maybe being conspiratorial, but I feel like, of course, they have to be close, right? A lot of our adversaries around the world probably would want a nuclear weapon to be able to defend themselves. So how close were they or weren't they?
Well, if you go back to 1995 and move forward from that, almost every year, you can find public statements and speeches, both here in the United States as well as in Israel, where Mr. Netanyahu is telling everybody Iran is within 2 weeks of a nuclear weapon. Iran is within 2 days of a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's been going on and on and on. President or Mr. Netanyahu once and wanted was to drag the United States into a war against Israel's adversaries in the region.
Yes.
That's what he wanted. He's gotten it. Whether we like it or not, we are in fact at war now in a very demonstrable way with Iran. Now we're at war with Russia too, but we haven't engaged directly. So we tend to tiptoe around the illusion that we're not at war with Russia. But the Russians understand that Iran was never a threat until we decided to invest heavily in it, install a government, and fight them. Well, the same thing is true right now with Israel.
Yeah, this is true. You know, you can go back to see countless examples beginning in 1992 when Netanyahu's saying that they're weeks or months away. Those have been distributed on social media sites. But this has been a tale of madness from the start for at least like 35 years. And there are articles that came out of Israel back in the 80s that warn of Iran's acquisition of nukes to come in the near future. Notice how they don't say that Iran has a nuclear weapon, and I think that's telling. You know why they never say that? Is because then war and regime change wouldn't be on the table. They'd be like North Korea. But they don't say that they're not working toward a nuclear weapon no matter what, because that doesn't fit the war propaganda campaign either, because if they don't have one, then we wouldn't strike them. They always have to say, they're within days of acquiring one. They're on the cusp of it. And I think that's telling. They never move from that position, no longer how much time goes by, and then they just hope that you don't notice it. But people are noticing it. Dissidents realize this, and it really highlights the madness that is these stupid military interventions on behalf of the Israel lobby and the neocons.
Israel is very definitely interested in having us on the ground. When I say on the ground, I'm talking about primarily our air and naval power, do everything that we can to utterly destroy and flatten Iran for them. Because Israel is the stalking horse for this regional hegemony. I mean, Israel wants regional hegemony. They're not satisfied with anything less than Iran's total destruction and dismemberment, because Iran is the one state that stood up against them. So they very definitely want to see Iran destroyed. But Iran's turning out to be a much tougher nut to crack, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I think this whole thing is going to fail. The question is, how long will it take us to figure that out? And I just don't know the answer.
Yeah, Americans basically just have to hope that the next time the sabers rattle over war with Iran, which they have since, decades, Bush put them on the axis of evil with North Korea and Iraq. How many more times do we have to hear about this and how much of a dire threat they are, and all this madness about a mushroom cloud appearing over New York City? That's stupidity. But yeah, I mean, I guess we just have to hope we have a president or Congress at that time, and maybe not even that, because Congress just punts and defers its authority to the president on war, regardless of who is the president, to make the decision not to draw us back into war with Iran again. So yeah, Macgregor's totally right here.
But in addition to chanting things like death to America, I mean, the pictures that I see out of Iran and the narrative is that, I mean, they stone women, they are extremely oppressive, that even Iranians speak out against the government, and they want a sense of freedom that they haven't had since basically the 1970s.
Haven't you seen thousands of these Iranians on the streets of Iran waving Israeli and American flags? There are no such pictures. There are no Israeli or American flags flying anywhere. There are not millions of people in the streets cheering the destruction of their own country.
I've even seen Iranian people posting online saying that they hope that the Ayatollah is toppled. So I guess I feel like even the Iranians are against their own government in some ways, and they would not want nuclear proliferation and that type of risk.
You have definitely internalized the wishful thinking that is widespread inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. I would tell you that right now, as a result of our attacks and Israel's attacks on Iran, the government in Tehran is stronger than it has ever been, and has more support from the population than it has ever had in the past. This whole business of regime change is always based on false assumptions, that everybody wants it, and that if you just push hard enough, everything will fall apart. That's what they've said about Russia. That's what they're saying now about Iran.
They also said that about Iraq, that if the U.S. invaded and toppled Saddam's regime, we'd be greeted as liberators. That was one of the biggest propaganda lines from people like Rumsfeld and Cheney and Bush. But I think that both of these individuals are correct to some extent. It's not, beyond the realm of imagination that there would be dissidents within Iran that aren't exactly pleased with what their government's doing. There certainly has to be. There's that in every country. But is it really manifesting into mass-scale movements and protests? No, I think Macgregor's right that they are generally galvanized behind their government more relative to other times. Same way that the U.S. was after 9/11. Was every single person in the United States a fan of Bush after 9/11? No, hardly not. But these types of incidents do have a effect of spreading nationalism, spreading propaganda that, a beleaguered and attacked government, one that's under siege by the greatest powers in the region and in the world, is going to draw up support in defense of that government. So I think that's right, too.
What I'm trying to tell you is that's not true. And I know there are lots of things online. And you and I both know that the problem with everything online is like the problem with anything on the internet. It will all put up with anything you put on it. And you also have to consider the very high probability that you're also being treated to a steady diet of disinformation and misleading statements that come out of Israel. Israel plants all sorts of stories all the time designed to make itself look great and Iran look terrible, and tries to foment hostility between the United States and virtually anybody they don't like.
This is true. I mean, this is what's drawn in the United States to all these stupid regime change operations in the region. And guess what? There were complicit actors in the United States too, but a lot of it is the Israel lobby and the regional experts like Benjamin Netanyahu, who testified in front of Congress in either 2002 or 2003 and said, hey, if you remove Saddam, I guarantee you there will be positive reverberations throughout the region. Well, so much for that. There's been no positivity that has reverberated as a result of that decision. We got 1 million Iraqis dead. We've gotten billions of dollars spent in that madness, a 20-year occupation. And guess what? Now a less secular, more fundamentalist government controls Iraq. And ISIS did too. So that's where we're at there.
I would tell you, if you want to see women subjected to some degree of oppression, certainly the numbers of Christians who are being murdered right now in Syria certainly fills that bill. Now that we have the former deputy commander of ISIS in charge of Syria.
Yeah, the former deputy commander of ISIS in Syria is Jolani, otherwise known as al-Shara. He fought on the side of al-Qaeda against U.S. soldiers in Iraq, and then he was involved in ISIS in Syria. He's now the leader, and he's the guy that Israel and the Israel lobby wanted to displace Assad. He's the one that USA dumped $15 billion into supporting in terms of overthrowing Assad as part of Operation Timber Sycamore, and that didn't succeed until 2024, but he's right here too. It's Christians that are being hunted down there. At least Assad, for all his treachery, however bad of a leader he was, he actually protected religious minorities, including Christians. But that's not good enough for Israel. We want ISIS to head Syria instead.
Thanks to the close cooperation between Mossad, the CIA, MI6, and Turkey, we have essentially a terrorist state in Syria.
Yeah.
And for the moment, it's friendly to Israel because it's being told to be friendly by Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Mr. Erdogan is in charge. You also have Saudi Arabia. You want to see women stoned and put to death? That's a great place to go. You'll find evidence for that, and beheadings and so forth.
And Saudi Arabia, the great ally of the United States, that's true of. That's the country that the U.S. embarked upon the mad project of the Yemen involvement. Over the course of more than a decade, starving over 500,000 people there, still taking place. And as part of that blockade to placate the Saudis is the United States. And remember when they were talking about, oh, why do the Yemenis shoot at our carriers? Well, I wonder why. They're starving the country. They're there at the behest of Saudi Arabia, who is pissed off that the United States invaded and displaced Iraq because Saudi Arabia, correctly by the way, realized that that would mean more Iranian influence in Iraq. Well, that is what happened. And guess what? We're still in this stupid struggle against Yemen. It got exacerbated in March when Trump started bombing it for basically a month. So yeah, all these stupid entangling alliances in the region have never done good for the American citizen.
Not in Iran. So I think there's a concerted effort to keep people in the dark about what is real and what is not, because that's essential to fomenting the support. In the final analysis, though, we're Americans first, and we have to always ask the question, what business is it of ours what people in other countries do, regardless of where they live? This is always a problem. Should we intervene somewhere to correct someone's behavior because we are the model? Everyone should see us. I would point out something that's very important. There are no foreign flags on the streets in Iran. There are no secret fifth columns or anything else. But I can take you to Los Angeles and I can show you crowds with Mexican flags and El Salvadoran flags, and you'll see those in Chicago. That should be of concern to us here at home. And nobody seems to mention it. Our social cohesion is quite weak. And that's why there is no declaration of war. That's why there's no debate. If Americans found out what we were really up to, most Americans would say, why? What difference does it make to us?
Yeah, I have to agree with Macgregor on almost every single point he made here. All these stupid struggles in the Middle East are the product of dangerous entanglements, dangerous entangling alliances that Washington and Jefferson warned us about. You know, in Jefferson's inaugural address, and he didn't speak particularly well or very often, but he got up, when he was being sworn in, and he said that peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, should essentially be the American creed. Well, we certainly haven't we haven't abided by that in a long time. And really, that was the track to success. That's why the U.S. stayed out of all these stupid foreign wars for about a century's worth of time, from the Monroe Doctrine forward. And there were some wars. You had the Spanish-American War and the Mexican-American War, but we didn't get involved in all these stupid foreign entanglements overseas where it didn't impact us whatsoever. You know, millions of Europeans died during the time frame in which the U.S. generally minded its own business during that time. This is the same sensibilities that Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich and Justin Amash and usually Rand Paul, back as well and support as well. And that's what's worth supporting. Get our troops out of the Middle East. Stop this stupid collaboration with Israel for these stupid regime change wars that have the U.S. siding with Al-Qaeda. It's just so preposterous. And if Americans really knew what was going on and how this impacts other areas of their life, like the cost of goods and services, inflation, debt, civil liberty curtailments and violations under the Patriot Act and DHS that have pretty much taken the shredder to the Fourth Amendment, I think they would be very concerned about that. So let's go back to that time where we aren't paying attention to all this empire building madness, because that was a better time for American foreign policy. But I do want to hear from what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Is Macgregor correct about Iran? Do you see this conflict being prolonged and stretching out into the future for long lengths of time? And is there anything you think he's missing? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Make sure to subscribe to Natalie Brunell also. She has a great podcast. And please consider becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. If you become a YouTube member, you can watch all of my videos in advance, and I'd really appreciate your support that way. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Take it easy, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.